at Visva-Bharati University, Shantiniketan, an adjunct fellow at the Institute of Chinese Studies, Delhi, and finally, Dr. Joe Thomas Karackattu, in charge of IIT Madras China Studies Center and co-convenor of the 13th AICCS. I would now like to invite the chair, Professor Uberoi, to initiate the proceedings and give opening remarks. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for that introduction, Rija. It's a great honor for me to be here presiding over this final and valedictory session of this very interesting conference of China Studies. It had its own special theme, China at the Crossroads, New Directions in Politics, Environment, and Economy, and it had its own special characteristics as well. As everyone knows, this conference had to be held perforce under the shadow of the COVID-19 pandemic. And as several people have remarked, there are limitations arising from this. I think many of us felt the absence of face-to-face conviviality, hugging old friends, renewing old relationships, making new contacts in person, and putting faces to the names that we had otherwise come across. And continuing dialogues initiated in previous sessions, and extracurricular activities such as always happen when one travels out of town, namely tasting the local culinary delicacies, sometimes a spot of so-called shopping. And I personally would have loved to have seen the IIT Madras campus, which I believe is a very beautiful one. But as we've also congratulated ourselves, there are also advantages to the webinar model. And one is, of course, that we've greatly expanded our outreach in a way that we could never have achieved otherwise. I think there were, people can correct me here, something between 400 and 500 participants in attendance at the inaugural session. Other sessions were very well attended indeed, and we could never have imagined that happening otherwise. And we also had the company of China Studies scholars from abroad. I think our China Studies conferences have always had a little sprinkling of foreign scholars, but we have never had quite so many as at present. So this has been, something nice that has happened in the middle of an otherwise grim situation. Now, as in previous conferences, the overall theme was chosen in collaboration with the partner institution, in this case, the Center for Chinese Studies at the China Studies at the IIT Madras. And we hoped that it would be subject relevant to the interests of faculty and students, not only of the center, but also perhaps, hopefully, this might be confirmed by Joe, of students elsewhere in the IIT. Certainly from the chat box, I saw a little evidence of participation from other students interested to know a bit more about China. I think the theme put forward by our partners and was very welcome, and it certainly served to broaden the scope of China studies beyond the restricted geopolitical and geoeconomic bilateral framework and the comparative India-China framework, which have rather dominated the work of China studies, as Sonika pointed out in her presentation a short while ago. As usual, in the All India Conference of China Studies, There were sessions on the so-called state of China studies, so to speak. But in this case, we had two, and they were both thought-provoking. One was on methods or methodologies, and the other on the content and direction of China studies. In some cases, we saw very visceral reactions to the situation of China studies at present and concern for the future. As usual, there was a mix of special panels, including these two on China studies that I've just referred to, but also on the reducing dependency and economic engagement with China. That's a matter of great concern at present and great intense debate nationally. On urbanization in China and India, which is definitely a forward-looking project, in which there were many other AICCS fellows and adjunct fellows who would have an interest, and environment and climate change, which of course was central to the overall theme. And then we had the so-called thematic panels within the ambit of the overall theme, volunteered by individual scholars and selected on the basis of peer reviews, first of their abstracts and then of the final papers. So taken together, they provided very rich fare, I think richer than usual, perhaps. They showed continuity, they showed change, and hopefully they also provided inspiration for aspiring young scholars setting out on their academic journeys. I hope that our sometimes self-critical mode doesn't put people off embarking on the journey just because there are difficulties along the way. Now, in this particular valedictory session, which will be very, very short, there are two things that are going to happen. Basically, a thanksgiving and acknowledgement to all those who have helped, and a handing over to the running of the next, that is the 14th conference, to the next institution in line. There is a slight change in the program that has been advertised here. Professor Sreemati Chakrabarti's comments will be as convener and of the 13th conference will be quite brief, and the report on the conference will be presented by Dr. Joe Thomas Karackattu. So we look forward to that very much, as we had enjoyed, I think, his initial opening remarks, which I found very accessible and very welcoming indeed. This will be followed by the welcome to the delegates for the 14th conference by Professor Avijit Banerjee, Professor and Head of Department of Chinese Language and Culture at China Bhavan, Visva-Bharati University, Shantiniketan. And finally, Dr. Karackattu will return to deliver the vote of thanks. But before that, we must all remember to give him a real vote of thanks for welcoming us to IIT Madras, even if only virtually, and for the very excellent arrangements made by him at his end, and I might also say by our young helpers at AICCS. Really, considering how these things go, we didn't have too many glitches at all. And I think, even in a real life conference proceeding, you can have plenty of glitches anyhow, like when the microphones start screeching, when you can't put on the PowerPoint, when people miss the right room to go to, and so on. So this was, I think we need to feel very gratified that even under these conditions, this was able to be pretty smooth, I would say. So my own take, apart from the aforesaid, was that we had quite a rich fare and variety within the overall ambit. We had a very good mix of senior and established scholars, and I might say also public intellectuals, and of the next and upcoming generation or generations, the middle generation, and a much younger generation. And in general, I think that we are witnessing, since I have been involved in these from the very beginning, the involvement of a younger generation with much better training, language skills, and diversity of interests. Yet there were also self-critical assessments of the state of play in China's studies, and perhaps at the end, a concern that the momentum that has been built up in the last 1 or 2 decades may not continue. There seem to be increasing obstacles as a result of the bilateral downturn, and the general feeling that every Indian citizen has made up his or her mind about China, and there is not a feeling that any expertise is required to modify, moderate, or at least make more nuanced the views that people have come to hold as a result of the unhelpful stereotypes that now dominate the public domain. That said, I'll now request Professor Sriramati Chakrabarti, Vice-Chairperson of AICCS, but the convener of this meeting, to just say a few brief words before passing on to Joe for his summary and overview. Sriramati, do come in. Sriramati, can you ask? Could someone?
Ma'am, you're muted.
Right.
Okay, can I be heard now?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Patricia. So the 13th All India Conference for China Studies has come to an end, and it has been a very fruitful event. It has been very satisfying, fulfilling, and very, very encouraging, I must say. On November 10th, 2019, when we concluded the 12th AICCS at Jindal Global University, we were all hoping that within a year we will all meet on the campus of IITM Chennai for the 13th conference. However, that was not to be. We could not hold it over there, and for a while I was at least feeling a little discouraged. In fact, I even thought that the conference may not be held. I remember sometime in May or June, on the sidelines of an ICS online meeting, I told Director Ashok Kant that 13 is really an unlucky number and we are unable to hold the conference. And he immediately shot back saying, no, who says we won't hold it? We will, of course, hold it. We will have it online. And then I thought, well, will IITM agree to it? But then I found that IITM was very forthcoming, very encouraging. And then finally we decided to go ahead. The process started, we invited abstracts, and then there was a call for papers were sent. And we had regular meetings, some internal ones of ICS and some jointly with IITM to decide on the panels, the special panels, the chairs, the moderators, the discussants, and all this was quite exciting for us. And we were sure that the conference will come to a successful conclusion, which it has. And one observation I must make before I end is that at the 12th AICCS, the word COVID and pandemic did not exist. But this time in this conference, the term, these two words must have been used at least 1,000. I don't know if anybody has kept account, but at least 1,000 times these two words must have been used. So that shows how the situation changes. However, we hope Next year, our conference will be offline, or at least partly offline. And uh, hope we will also have a good number of papers. This time also, we were very satisfied with the number of papers, the number of institutions that joined this conference, and also attendance for the entire conference was very, very impressive. And of course, there will be a formal vote of thanks, but I must thank our collaborators, IIT Chennai, and particularly Dr. Joe Thomas Karackattu and his team for being great help, and also the young staff of ICS who have worked very hard to make this conference what it has been. So thank you very much. Now I would request Dr. Joe Thomas Karackattu to make the presentation.
Thank you, Sriramati. Joe, do come in.
Thank you, Professor Uberoi. Thank you, Professor Chakrabarti. And good evening and welcome to all of you to the final session on day 3 of the 13th All India Conference of China Studies. As we mentioned at the start, the All India Conference of China Studies, an annual flagship event of the Institute of Chinese Studies in Delhi, was jointly organized this time with the IIT Madras China Studies Center, virtually of course, between the 28th and 30th of January. The principal objective of the AICCS is to spread interest in and strengthen research on China and East Asian studies in India. IIT Madras China Studies Center is proud to co-host the 13th AICCS conference. Each conference has a special theme, and this year's theme was focused on China at crossroads, new directions in politics, environment, and economy. We started off day 1 with the inaugural session on the 28th of January. It began with the co-convenor's introduction to the conference theme and how the overall participation by way of papers and themes included for discussion in this year's conference incorporated research agendas covering the study of society, economy, institutional reforms, environment, beyond elite politics and foreign policy of China. This was followed by Ambassador Ashok Kantha, Director of the ICS, formally delivering the welcome remarks, where he also spoke about the growth of ICS over the years, hosting annual gatherings at different universities each year with an objective of promoting China studies, and how the AICCS is a great opportunity for a new generation of China studies scholars to think innovatively about India-China relations. The next speaker in that session was Professor Bhaskar Ramamurthy, Director of IIT Madras, who delivered the opening remarks, where he highlighted the importance of having more study and research on China, and how the IIT Madras China Studies Center was conceived as a platform to encourage cross-disciplinary research on India and China, especially for domains such as technology. Professor Sreemati Chakrabarti, convener of the 13th AICCS and Vice-Chairperson of ICS, shared her gratitude to all those who made the conference possible and stated that the main aim of the AICCS is to take China studies to the rest of the country, not just limited to Delhi. She also thanked the Ministry of External Affairs for their continued support. The highlight of the inaugural session was the keynote address given by Honorable Dr. S. Jaishankar, Minister of External Affairs, Government of India, who stressed that in order to stabilize India-China relations, the relationship should be based on 3 mutual grounds: mutual respect, mutual sensitivity, and mutual interests. Dr. Jaishankar proposed 8 proposals to handle ties with China, which were under exceptional stress following the events of last year and recent tensions along the border. The inaugural session was concluded by the vote of thanks delivered by the co-convener, thanking the esteemed panel of guests and audience members. Next, we had special panel, which was part of the first session of academic topics that we brought up for discussion. And this was a special panel on methods in China studies research. The panelists for the session included Professor Kamal Sheel, Honorary Fellow at the Institute of Chinese Studies, Professor William Callahan, Professor of International Relations at the London School of Economics and Political Science, Professor Avijit Banerjee, Professor and Head, Department of Chinese Language and Culture at China Bhavan, and Dr. Usha Chandran, Assistant Professor at the Center for Chinese and Southeast Asian Studies, JNU. This panel was chaired by Professor Rana Mitter, Professor of History and Modern China, University of Oxford. In this session, Professor Kamal Sheel spoke about the importance of archival methods and archival records as sources of drawing historical narratives, and he drew attention to the prolific mass literature in vernacular languages and regional sources of knowledge, which, according to him, the scholarly community should make use of for their research, especially to bring out unknown China stories that are hidden in regional knowledge systems. This was followed by Professor William Callahan's presentation, where he discussed the importance of using visual methods for China studies research, highlighting the shift from warfare to mapfare by explicit reference to what he termed as the U-shaped line in the South China Sea, portrayed by China in maps exported to the rest of the world, and also often used as a watermark in passports. Professor Avijit Banerjee, Professor and Head at China Bhavan, spoke on the rising importance of the study of Chinese language as an international language, and he stressed on the need for more initiatives to support researchers with opportunities to learn the Chinese language. The final speaker on this special session was Dr. Usha Chandran, who teaches at JNU, who spoke on social relations in the Chinese society as an example of an ideal type, laying out the sociological considerations of studying Chinese society. This was followed by our first thematic panel. This was a panel on the politics of ecology in the PRC. The panel was chaired by Professor Sanjay Chaturvedi, Professor and Dean at the Department of International Relations, South Asian University. The first speaker, Ms. Shagufta Yasmin, who's a PhD scholar at JNU, focused on China's environmental diplomacy, moving towards authoritarian environmentalism. We then had Saloni Sharma, who's also a PhD scholar at JNU, focusing on the concept of China's ecological civilization and how COVID-19 has been a tipping point, according to her, for environmental consciousness there. This was followed by Justin Joseph's paper. In his paper, which dealt with new media activism and politics of ecology in the PRC, Justin discussed how ordinary people in China are using new media for activism and protests on environmental issues using pamphlets, posters, Weibo, WeChat shares in a new form of engagement with power structures. The final speaker in that session was Dr. Sriram Natarajan, Adjunct Fellow at the Institute of Chinese Studies, who presented a paper on urban agriculture, food security, and urban food systems, focusing on the context of technology-driven agriculture in China. We also had a discussant in this session, Dr. Manish Kumar, who teaches at IIT Gandhinagar, who offered his views on the papers. And then finally, the session was summed up by the chair, Professor Sanjay Chaturvedi, who stressed on good ecology as being good economy. Day 2 began with our special panel, which was on reducing dependency in economic engagement with China. This special panel was moderated by Mr. Santosh Pai, Honorary Fellow and Treasurer at the ICCS. The panelists included Mr. Sanjay Chadha, Additional Secretary at the Department of Commerce, Dr. Mohan Kumar, Chairperson of Research and Information System for Developing Countries, Dr. Ajit Ranade, Group Executive President and Chief Economist at the Aditya Birla Group, and Professor Amita Batra, Professor of Economics at JNU. Excuse me. The session was steered by Santosh Pai in a Q&A format where panelists had the opportunity to respond to questions on India's economic dependency on China. Mr. Sanjay Chadha, he mentioned how access to the Chinese market has always been found wanting. Ambassador Mohan Kumar contended that trade between two countries was less likely to abate conflict, and how engaging in positive trade in the backdrop of the political fallout between both countries was not desirable. In contrast, Dr. Ajit Ranade made a case for taking a long-term view, arguing that if India needed to reduce its poverty rate and improve the economic growth rates, it cannot shy away from engaging in trade with the world. He also said that if India was going to stay out of the RCEP, it was going to lose. The final speaker, Professor Amita Batra, highlighted that India could not remain obsessed with bilateral deficits alone, and she also stressed on the need to increase competitiveness in the manufacturing sector.
Excuse me, I think we have only, I've just been warned, we have only a couple of minutes left, and so could we sort of hurry up with the report, which you're doing most marvelously, so that we now out on the handover.
Right. I think most of the notes I've made are based on the presentations, which are also available in parallel in the brochure, if just the titles of the presentations are required. So I think it would be prudent to move on to the handover, and I can come back with a vote of thanks towards the end, if that's fine.
That would be very good. So now I would thank you very much. This was really a brilliant summary so far. So may I call on Professor Avijit Banerjee to, as it were, take the baton and tell us which direction he's going to run in.
Okay. Thanks, Professor Patricia Uberoi, and thanks all the esteemed members of the Institute of Chinese Studies. So the Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi, has been organizing national level conferences on China studies every year as one of its sustained efforts of building China studies in India. These conferences of China studies have drawn wide attention from scholars of China studies throughout the country who have shown keen interest in participating in All India China Studies conferences. China Bhavan organized the 5th All India Conference of China Studies at Visva-Bharati, Shantiniketan on December 15th, 16th, 2012 in collaboration with the Institute of Chinese Studies. The university was established in 1921 by Rabindranath Tagore, and this year, 2021, marks the 100 years of its establishment. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the Chancellor of the University, on December 24th, 2020, inaugurated Visva-Bharati University's centenary celebrations event via video conferencing. China Bhavan is the earliest institute in this subcontinent where Chinese studies program was initiated by Tagore. In 1937, Tagore built China Bhavan with the help of Professor Tan Yun-shan. Later on, Chinese program spread in other parts of India. We are extremely happy to note that the Institute of Chinese Studies have decided to host the conference again in Shantiniketan. It is my great pleasure to announce that in order to mark the university's centenary celebration, China Bhavan is delighted to hold the 14th All India Conference of China Studies at Shantiniketan in November 2021 in collaboration with ICS. I am sure that the conference will be a wonderful opportunity not only to educate students and young researchers, but also a place to learn many new things as well as to share experience. I cordially welcome you all to Shantiniketan for the 14th All India Conference of China Studies in November 2021, and looking forward to meet you all and to join in fruitful discussions. See you all at Shantiniketan physically. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Avijit. Thank you. Now, let me return to Joe for the vote of thanks.
Right.
Very briefly.
At the outset, on behalf of the Institute of Chinese Studies and the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras, China Studies Center, we would like to thank our wonderful audience for your enthusiastic participation at the 13th All India Conference of China Studies. We had a record audience for any AICCS, with the average number of participants being roughly 200, given the fact that day one we had a much bigger audience. And of course, depending on the interest in different topics, but roughly we averaged around 200. We also thank all the resource persons, the chairs, the discussants, the panelists at the 13th AICCS. Your participation enhanced the discussions and also offered insights and perspectives to the young scholars who presented their work. Again, I would like to thank on behalf of both ICS and IIT Madras China Studies Center our heartfelt thanks and appreciation for making the conference a success. And I hope the audience members had a fulfilling time during the 3 days. I would be failing in my duties if I do not mention the team which allowed the 3-day conference to be conducted flawlessly. At my end, at IIT Madras, we had a team of young students. Anaga was managing the entry of participants, muting people, removing people, and that's the reason why during the conference you did not have people moving around with laptops showing their ceiling fans to you. So they were promptly removing participants who were not following the rules. We had Ashna, who was taking care of the banners that you could see the moment you arrived at the meeting room. She was in charge of also taking care of session-wise summaries, helping out with transcription. We had Adira, who was managing the Q&A session, because of which many of the chairs, they found it easy to coordinate the interactive session that followed presentations. We had Chandni, who is an intern with us, who was managing the YouTube live settings. So people who were not able to enter the meeting room could actually watch it live on YouTube. We had Navneet, who was managing the entry of participants, again helping out Anaga in the functions of muting, removing participants, transcription, and also Q&A sessions. And finally, Ramnath, a PhD student here, who was sort of making sure that all of these tasks, whether it concerned Q&A, whether it concerned social media updates, outreach, whether it concerned updates on websites, all of it went off well. I would also be failing in my duties if I don't mention the young team of representatives from the ICS who sort of were the backbone of the entire event. I must name Advitya Kachia, who was helping out with the design of the literature that you saw that went out in the outreach. We had Samanvay Singh Huda, who was handling registration and Zoom webinar proceedings. We had Colonel KK Venkatraman, whose voice you could hear every time anybody faced a glitch, every time anybody asked why they couldn't present or why their audio was not heard. It was Colonel Venkat who was sorting it out, and he also helped out with social media support. And we had Preksha Sri Chetri and Rija Nair, who managed moderation of most of the sessions on the other days that the co-convener was not entrusted with those sessions. They were the ones who were handling those sessions. I should also add that the planning for this conference took several months, and I must thank all the members who helped out with planning for this conference: Professor Patricia Uberoi, Professor Sreemati Chakrabarti, Professor Manoranjan Mohanty, Professor Alka Acharya, Professor Hemant Adlakha, Professor Sabri Mitra, Bhim Subha, Santosh Pai, Solomon Benjamin, Madhurima Nandi, Rija Nair, of course, and last but not least, Ambassador Ashok Kanta, who supported us by leading from the front. So with those words, I formally complete submission of the convener, co-convener's report, and also my vote of thanks. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. That was extremely gracious of you. And just thanks to everyone that you mentioned. One final thing to note is that the papers will be reviewed by a committee for awarding the Meera Sinha Bhattacharjee Award, named after one of our early members of the ICS. And there will be a procedure for this, and the award will be given to a paper found worthy, and the possibility of a peer-reviewed publication in China report. That is in the future, but for the present, thank you very much. Thank you to a wonderful audience, and I'm sure everyone is looking forward to Shantiniketan next year. No COVID. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good evening.
Thank you, Professor Uberoi. On behalf of ICS, I would like to thank IITM China Studies Center and especially Dr. Zhou for co-hosting this event and making it a huge success. I'd also like to thank the print, our digital partners for the event, and finally our funders, Tata Trust, for their support to ICS. All the sessions of the conference are available on the ICS YouTube channel and will be uploaded on our website as well. So will be the report of the conference. We now look forward to meeting you all in person at the 14th AICCS at Visva-Bharati, Shantiniketan. With that, we come to the end of the valedictory session. Thank you and have a good evening.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.